Welcome in. I'm Dan Clasgens. He's James Adams. This is your Cricket Wireless fantasy football update right here on Getsportsinfo.com. James, week one of the season's here. I know you're as ecstatic as me about everything, but a lot of questions out there for fantasy owners, particularly at the running back position. Our Fantasy 5 today focuses on those week one running back dilemmas, and let's start with the Vikings' Adrian Peterson. Here's a guy that slipped into the second round in some drafts, first round in others. The owners who took a chance on him, though, now really can't count on him in week one. How do you factor him and Gerhardt if they're in your week one lineup decisions?
Well, I do have Peterson in a league or two, Dan. As you know, I'm in a million, but Peterson's not a guy I'm looking to play in week one, or Toby Gerhardt for that matter. If you've got a better option, you've got to take him. Even if Peterson was your second running back taken and you've got a third one you want to go with, this is the week to do that. You just don't know. No preseason touches, really hasn't had a whole lot of contact in practice, but he's expected to go. With him getting touches, Toby Gerhardt's number of touches obviously goes down. So if I've got a better option, I'm staying away. As you said, maybe a good flex play for either one of those guys, but I would like to have somebody I can count on for more than maybe 10 to 15 touches as my number two running back.
On the first edition of the Week 1 GSI cheat sheet, I have Gerhardt at 24, Peterson at 37, basically saying I don't start Peterson even as a flex. Gerhardt, a low-end running back, too, with some decent upside in a Jaguars matchup that I sort of like. MJD, that was the story we broke Sunday during our show on Fox Sports 1360. The holdout's over. 38 days he held out, though. And now, in week one, it's Rashad Jennings getting the nod as the starter for Jacksonville. Will we see Jones-Drew in week one? And how many weeks, James, do you think it's going to take for him to return to that top 10 running back capability that we've become accustomed with, MJD?
Again, with MJD, if you took him, it was probably not as your number one running back, maybe not as your number two, depending on when your draft day was. I don't think I'm going with MJD or Jennings this week. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Jennings. I think he's going to have more touches. MJD going forward, I think maybe week two, probably by week three is when we're really going to see him get the touches. That's when he's going to have a few weeks under his belt in practice, learning a new offense. So if you have to, again, maybe you're forced to start him in week one or two. I would really like to hold off until week three, see what we get from him on the field for 2 weeks. Of course, if he has a big week in week one, that may change next week.
Yeah, and I look at Rashad Jennings. I have him 28 on the cheat sheet. I'm actually using him in a PPR as my flex play. I don't have the best options in the world there, but I'm certainly not feeling all that uncomfortable going in that route with him. James, Trent Richardson. Good news is, doesn't appear that the minor scope on his knee is going to keep him out too long. His status still up into question as we record this, but I expect to see him play, but I think the Browns are going to limit him. 10 touches would be optimistic. That's why I have him 26. Montario Hardesty expected to get a lot of that workload in the matchup there against the Eagles. Can you justify putting him in your lineup?
I really don't want to play either of these guys. One, we think the Eagles' defense is going to be pretty solid. I mean, a good team overall. Two, the offensive line in Cleveland, not very good at all. Richardson's the only guy I'm ever going to want to play from that group. And this week is a hard week to play him. But you know, Dan, they picked him. They're going to stand behind him. I don't know how many touches he gets this week for the simple fact that Cleveland doesn't look like a team who's going anywhere this season. So it doesn't make sense to blow up a first-round pick in your first game in a season that, unfortunately for Cleveland fans, really isn't going to come down to matter.
All right, so there are the three big things we're watching. Let's hit some of these quick situations with, who you would take. The Steelers' backfield. Mendenhall is making progress. Doesn't look like he's back there. Isaac Redman, his status a little shaky with that ankle. Jonathan Dwyer's on the rise. Redman or Dwyer, who is your pick in week one?
You know, everybody loved Redman coming in, and I think if I had to take one of those guys, I would take them. Dwyer, just such a question mark, but he's probably the upside play. If you're looking at your matchup and you think you're going to need big points to surmount a week one victory, then maybe you go that way with Dwyer. But I think if I have to play somebody, it's Redman. But again, these are situations that all along in draft season I've done my best to avoid having to make these kind of decisions from these teams.
Yeah, if you have a Redman or a Dwyer on your roster, let's hope it was to build depth. Same thing could be said in Washington. Who knows what Mike Shanahan's going to do in week one? Roy Halou, Alfred Morris have had a sensational preseason, and Evan Royster all figuring into that mix. One thing, at least they cut Tim Hightower, but James, I didn't roster any of these guys. If I had to pick one, I think Halou still is the best talent, and to me, the only Redskins running back worth even rostering at this point. But this week, who knows?
You know, I think Alfred Morris is the guy to own really out of that group because I think he's the one with upside. But Mike Shanahan and fantasy football, they're two things that just do not go well together. So it's another one of those situations. It's a team I don't want to have to make these decisions. I like guys who I know are going to go in and get 30 carries, 25 carries. None of these guys throughout the course of the 17-week season are ever going to be a safe play unless the other two are hurt.
Well, there you have it. That's our Fantasy 5 Week 1 dilemmas. Get the complete rankings for Week 1 by visiting Getsportsinfo.com. Join myself, James Adams, and Stephanie Theobald every Sunday morning. We'll be there with the Cricket Wireless Fantasy Football Game Day on Fox Sports 1360.